With Aleph, it's the end of the Perek HaBoinus, short prokim now. So the Mishnah spoke about writing on Shabbos. So there was a machloikis, if you write one letter, but it's a Rosh Tevis, is it considered writing or not? Kosav ois achas nitrikuin. If he wrote one letter and it was Rosh Tevis, Rabbi Yeshua ben Seira Mechayev, he says Yechayev v'chachamim poitrim. Now, if the whole concept of Rosh Tevis would be made up, it would be man-made, so it sounds like it would be obvious that you're potter. The only reason there's a machlokes is because Rosh Tevis is a real thing. And the Torah writes things based on Rosh Tevis. And since the Torah writes things based on Rosh Tevis, so it's a substantial form of writing something. Therefore, there's a machlokes whether on Shabbos you're chayiv for writing Rosh Tevis. Amar Rabbi Yechanan Shem Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, minayin leloshe nitrikoin min haTorah. How do I know from the Torah that Rosh Tevis is a real thing? So he says, he brings a raya. Shenemer, it says that Avram Avinu was called Avraham with the extra hay. And the Eibusha tells him the reason is Ki Av Hamoin Goyim Nisaticha, because I have made you the father of many nations. Now, it sounds like, I didn't look this up, but it sounds like the Gemara has a problem that, the Torah also mentions this problem, that if it would only mean the wording that's written in the pasuk, that he's the father of many nations, then it should say, you should call him Avham. I'm not sure if that's the reason. That's the question. I'm not sure if that's the question. But the Gemara, the fact that he's called Avraham to stand for Avhamoin Goyim already shows you some sort of Rosh Tevis. But it sounded the Gemara, it was clear to the Gemara that Avhamoin must be referring to more than just Avhamoin. It can't just be the actual wording. There's more to these words. It's a Rosh Tevis. Av nisaticha le'umois. The Aleph of Avhamoin says you're a father for the nations. Beis means Bachur nisaticha be'umois. You're chosen from all the nations. The Hey of Hamoin stands for Hamoin chavim nisaticha be'umois. From you will have many people which will be beloved amongst all the nations. The Mem of Hamoin stands for Melech Nisaticha La'umis. You are a king of the nations. He became a king. Ephraim said he's the king. Nasiya the king, Mata B'Sechina, he's a king. Vasik Nisaticha Ba'umis. You are someone much more careful than everyone else in your behavior. That's what the Vav of Hamoin stands for. And the last nun means you are trusted, which means Avhamoin Goyim Nisaticha meant that there's many words which are hinted in these words, and the Torah referred to that. From the fact that the Torah referred to that, that shows us that Rosh Tevis is a real thing. Give me just 1 second. 1 second. So I guess the Marsha says that if it would only mean the literal pshat, you're a father of the nations, you wouldn't have to hint the word Hamoin. He could have just said, you're Av Lagoyim, you're a father for the nations. So obviously you need the word Hamoin, because that's hinted in the Hey that was added to Avram. But the question is, why? What's special about calling him the father of many nations? The father of nations. It's the same specialty. Only because Av Hamoin has many more specialties hinted in the Rosh Tevis, that's why it's so special to call him Av Hamoin. So we see that Rosh Tevis is a real thing. Okay, that's what Rabbi Yechanan said in the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra. Then Rabbi Yechanan did Omer. Rabbi Yechanan added his own proof that Rosh Tevis is a real thing. It's from the word Anoichi. Anoichi is not a regular word in Torah. Usually the word is Ani. It should have said Ani Hashem Alikecha. Why Anoichi? It must be hinting to Rosh Tevis. What is Rosh Tevis? Neutrikun. Ano nashi ksavis yavis. Literally means I myself wrote and gave the Torah. The Torah was written and given by Hashem himself. So this always translates it. Ano nafshi ksavis yavis. I wrote and gave myself through the Torah. But the simple pshat is I myself wrote and gave the Torah. Rabbanan Amri, the same thing, that Anoichi is an unusual word. It must be a Rosh Tevis. What is Rosh Tevis? Amino ni'ima ksiva yehiva. A nice, a pleasant saying, I wrote, it was written and given. Fine. Ikad Amri, Anoichi lemafreya. Now you read it backwards. Yehiva ksiva ne'emoni namorel. I gave it, I wrote it, and whatever is written over there is trusted. Why does it have to be backwards? I'm not sure. So obviously there's something deeper to this. Why? What's the reason of saying it backwards? 1 second. Okay, whatever. I'm not sure why it's after backwards. Fine. It's trusted words. Okay. The Veda be Nosun Amri, they bring another raya. There's an unusual word in Torah that the Malach tells Bilam the reason why your donkey went off the path, ki yorat haderech lenegdi, because yorat, it's one of a kind. They don't have that word in Torah elsewhere. What's yorat haderech? So it's Rosh Tevis. Yora, she was afraid, the donkey. Why? Rasa, because she saw me, and therefore not says she went off the path. So again, we see that the Torah uses Rosh Tevis. Dvei Rabbi Shmuel Tana, the Yeshiva Rabbi Shmuel, there's another raya. It says caramel. It says that you should bring the barley for the oimer. It should be caramel. Again, unusual word. What is that? Caramoli. It's put together of two words. That it should be a filled pillow, which means to say that the husk, the peel is called like the pillow, and the kernel is a stuffing, and when it's fresh, it's blown up, it's larger, and then you dry it out. So the oimer was brought from fresh barley, which in order to be able to grind it and make it into flour, you had to toast it because it was too fresh. It wasn't dried out yet. So it's caramel. It was still filled with the grain. It was still fresh. And therefore it wasn't dry, it wasn't shriveled.
You cannot grind if it's wet.
Right. And that's why you have to toast it.
This is why you have to toast it. It's for 100%. The grinding.
That's what you just said, yeah. Right. Rav Acher by Yankiv Omar, v'hu kilani klola nimretzes. It says that Shimi ben Gera cursed David, a very strong curse, and David swore to him that he won't touch him, but he really deserved to be punished, and therefore he told Shlomo that he should do it instead of him. Now, when he told him that he cursed him a very strong curse, he hinted what the curse was, because only then it'll be understood like why he deserves such a strong punishment. So the word, the Nimretzes, hinted what he cursed him. He said Noyefu. He's how do you say it? Someone that goes with other women because he went with Bathsheba. Mayaviu, he's a Mayavi. His mother, his great grandmother was from Mayav. Reitzeachu, he killed Uriah Achiti. Tzoyreru, he's an enemy. Toyevahu, he's disgusting. Okay, what those last two things are hinting to, I'm not sure if that's something else or just on top of what we said before, that because of all that he, so to say, did, he's such a bad person. That's what Shimi told him. And since Shimi told him that, he deserved to be punished. Fine. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Amar, another proof. Yehuda told Yosef, when they caught them with the goblet, what can we say and how can we justify ourselves? So the word nitztadok again is an unusual word in Torah. So it's trying to say, I'm not sure what he's saying. Either he's saying that they're saying this, that we're not so good. Wait 1 second. I'm sorry, the opposite. Really, they knew that they were right. They were saying, listen, we can't justify yourself. You caught us, but they weren't convinced. So in the word that he said, how can we justify ourselves? He hinted to him, we are 100% right. And if you're going to start up with us, then we're going to right away say that we're right. Now that we can be on good terms. I say, no, how could I justify myself? But I'm hinting right away that if you're going to start up, we're going to pull out our cards. What did he tell them? We are right. Tzadikim anachnu, we are tzadikim. Tohirim anachnu, we are pure. Dachim anachnu, also can mean either we are pure or we were crushed by other people. And kadoshim anachnu, we're holy. In other words, we know who's right. We know who's right. Yes, I'm saying all the right words. I'm saying how can we speak and how can we justify. But I'm hinting to you in the Rosh Hashanah, we could justify ourselves. We know we are right. Right?
But they assume that Yosef understands Hebrew.
Okay. It could be that what they told the interpreter brought out what they really thought. So they told the interpreter Manit Stadok, and in their mind, they were hinting that we are right. The interpreter, whatever he interpreted, that's not their issue. Yeah? Okay. Then the Mishnah goes on to like this. The last Mishnah started off that if you wrote 2 letters with one forgetting, you did not remember in between, then you're chayiv. What if you did remember in between? So there's a machlokes. If you remember that you're not allowed to write these letters in between, I'm just bringing an example. It was enough time. I'm sorry, says Rashi. Let's say you didn't remember, but it was so far off that you could have remembered. That's another example. Are you chayiv? Rabbi Gamliel mechayiv v'chachamim poitrim. Why? But my commitment, what's the machlokes? Rabbi Gamliel suffered ein yediyah lechatzi shir. In the Torah it says, "Oy hoida yilov chatosei." If he remembered his aveira, if he knew his aveira, this is not an aveira. I mean, it's not a complete aveira. So it's not called knowing anything. You know that you almost did, but you didn't do. So it's as if you didn't find out. If you didn't find out, you didn't forget again. It's the same forgetting, and therefore you're chayiv. So Rabbi Gamliel suffered any deal lechatzi shir. If it was just a half a shir of the aveira, it's not called knowing. But Rabbanan Savri know yeshi deal lechatzi shir. Why? 1 second. 1 second. Good, because the truth is that we say that the chatzi shir also in Torah because really it is the aveira. It's just not large enough to make him chayiv. So it is considered he knew the aveira. It is an aveira. It's just not. The amount is not enough to make him chayiv. Now, just going back, what I said before, that the Mishnah is saying 2 cases. One case that he found out in between, and one case that he had enough time that he could have found out. That's Rashi's explanation. Tosfos argues and he says no. The Mishnah is just telling you an example that what he remembered in between. For example, he did it in the morning and he did it in the evening, and therefore very likely that he found that in between. But if he didn't find out, so then he wouldn't be. Then everyone would agree. Then everyone would agree that he's chayiv. That is not considered as if he found out. That's what Tosfos holds. Fine. Okay. So we learned about Rosh Hashanah, the Makar and Torah for Rosh Hashanah, and then we learned about finding out in the middle of a shir of the malacha. Is that considered finding out? Rabbi Gamliel says no, and Chachamim say yeah. Fine. The next Perek discusses again more malachas, the shir of certain malachas. Now these malachas, actually the original Mishnah of the Lamates malachas already mentioned the shir. But here it's going to mention either other opinions which argue or other details. That's maybe why it's in a different perek. It's a slightly different style than last perek. The last perek was giving a shear to things that were never, that the shear was not mentioned. Here it's giving a shear to things that were mentioned, but you want to add some details about it, or either details or other opinions. Okay. So the Mishnah in Lamites Malachis, the obvious Malachis mentioned that for weaving the shear is 2 threads. So we're going to bring now another opinion. Rabbi Lezer Eimer ha'oirek shloisha chutim batchila va'achas ala orik chayiv. I agree with you, 2 threads if you're in the middle of weaving. If you're just starting, 2 threads are not significant. It has to be 3. If you're finishing, or I'm sorry, if one second. Okay, if you're adding on something, not finishing, if you're adding on something which already exists, then it's 1 thread. So when is it 2? There's never 2. In other words, if you already did 1 and you added 1, okay, so you're chayiv. Although it's the beginning of the clothing, I'm not sure. No, he argues, he says, no, it's not 2. It's either 3 or 1. If it's the beginning, it has to be 3. And if it's in the middle, it has to be 1. 1 is already enough. It's already significant. So he argues on that shear. The beginning or in the end, the shear is 2 chutim. So you already had earlier in the Gemara, there's an opinion which says that when it says the end, it doesn't literally mean the end. It means the middle. Because if it's the end, even Chacham will agree that 1 is enough. Fine. Next, another melacha that was mentioned in the Mishnah of Lamites Malachis. One who makes 2, they call it heedles, I think, 2 loops for weaving. When they want to put in different loops in order to be able to rotate the different threads in order to be able to weave it. So if you set up 2 of those loops, according to Rashi, if you put in 2 threads into 2 loops, that's already considered starting the malacha of weaving. So that's what already that Mishnah said. This Mishnah is going to say where this applies. Benidin, whether it's a regular weaving loom or bekerus. Bekerus is, we'll see later in the Gemara, when they would weave curtains, it's a slightly different type of weaving loom. Or benafal v'kvara, by a sieve, different types of sieves. Enough is a sieve, and a kvara is a bit thicker. It's when they would put in kernels and take out all the straw from it. I know exactly what it's called, what's the name for it.
Sieve.
Oh, it's a sieve. Okay. So these 2 types of sieves, ubesal, or a basket. So here it's very different. Here they don't really put it through looms. It's that they weave, and they make boxes. They're like weaving it like one of those, they're not really a thread, but one of those like leaves or branches. They do 2 this way and 1 that way. So basically, if they formed 2 boxes by weaving it, you're also doing the malacha of oise bati nirim. You're not just weaving, you're also creating the frame to allow to weave further. When you're doing the bati nirim by weaving a clothing, so you have to have those looms in order to be able to allow the rest of the weaving to be done. And if you just wove the threads, you didn't put it into the looms, you didn't set up the weaving loom. However, by a basket or by a sieve that you weave it on it, what holds it is the actual material that you're using in order to weave it. So just forming 2 boxes, 2 squares, is also considered oisabati nirim. Is also considered creating the beginning of the frame, which allows the rest of the weaving. Okay, then we say va'toifer shtei tfiris, which was mentioned already earlier in the Mishnah, that sewing is 2 stitches. Va'kireya al menas litfer beis tfiris, and tearing is also the size, and in order to make 2 stitches. Now, all this was already mentioned in the Mishnah of the Lamites Malachos. So what are we coming to add over here? The Gemara will discuss. Okay, fine. Says the Gemara, Ki Asa Rabbi Yitzchak, when Rabbi Yitzchak came from Eretz Yisrael, Tani, he read this Mishnah Shtayim. Or not a Mishnah, he said over a Brisa that Rabbi Lezer says that in the beginning of weaving, 2 threads are enough. Not like our Mishnah, which says 3. Now, Tanan Gimel, our Mishnah is very accurate. Mishnayos are accurate. And in the Mishnah, it says 3. How can you come and tell me a Brisa 2? Says the Gemara, Leikashia, there's no question. One of them is speaking about thick, strong threads, and one is talking about thin threads. Now, so which is 3 and which is 2? There are 2 opinions. So some say one in one way. For thick ones, you must have 3. Only then it won't fall apart. Since they're thick, they don't stick together so well. And therefore, you have to have 3 in order to hold tight. However, 2 will fall apart. Ktini by thin threads, 2 will already hold together. Some say the other way around. Ktine, thin threads, 3 threads you'll pay attention to. They're noticeable. Today, lo yidi. 2 threads, no one sees them. It's not a significant act. Alime, however, by thick threads, 2 threads are noticeable and therefore they're good enough. So that's the 2 opinions. Fine. Okay. Tanya, we learned in a Brisa. Ha'oireg, one who weaves, gimel chutim batchila, 3 threads if he's starting the clothing, ve'echad ala orig, and 1 thread if he's continuing a weaving, chayiv. Without a name, this is written. In the beginning or in the end, shuram beis chutim. Fine. And then he concludes, ubesofa, if it's at the edge, that they make like a different type of frame to the clothing from a different type of material. So then everyone agrees, beis chutim bereichev gimel batin nirim. If you wove 2 threads in the width, or the length of 3 looms, in other words, 2 by 3, you did 2 threads within 3 opposite threads, then it's already considered something significant. 1 second. 1 second. Or not necessarily, I'm not sure if the shear is what I said, the 3 threads, or if you would imagine, if you would put those looms, those heedles, whatever, those loops that you put those threads and line them up one next to the other, if you would line up 3 of them, so it's the length of 3 of those loops. Fine. Why is that significant? Why even the one who holds that you must have 3 in the beginning agrees over here that 2 is good enough? What is this similar to? When it weaves a small belt, everyone agrees that if you have a clothing which is only 2 threads wide, you're chayiv, because it's significant. So since it's a different type of material on the edge of the clothing, so then even the Tanakama in this brisa, which happens to be Rabbi Lezer, as we'll see, which she said that you usually need to have 3 threads in the beginning of a clothing, but if it's a different material which is only meant for the edge, it's significant, and therefore 2 threads is wide enough. Fine. Says the Gemara, that's the end of the brisa. Says the Gemara, 1 second, let's recap. Let's go back to the beginning of this brisa. We just said, the brisa started off namelessly, anonymously, that if you started off with 3 threads, or if you continued with 1 thread. Yeah? Says the Gemara, Stamak Rabbi Lezer. This brisa quoted Rabbi Lezer anonymously, which means this brisa is obviously following Rabbi Lezer, and therefore he quotes him without a name. Tanya Idoch, we have a different brisa, which says, if one who weaves 2 threads, no matter if it's thick, which means you already wove a lot, no matter if it's the edge, meaning to say it's the beginning of the weaving, chayiv. And Rabbi Eliezer, no. Allah imra, basically on the edge, in the beginning of filu echad, ubesafa, but at the edge, when you started off, no, sorry, al hagas, if you're middle of weaving a filu echad, ubesafa on the edge, shnei chutim bereichav shloisha batinirim. He's saying two over here. Why two? That follows what we said in the last brisa. It's talking about when it's a different material, when the edge is a slightly different material, different color, whatever, something slightly different. And he explains if it's what is it similar to? When one weaves a small belt. Okay, that's the Bryce. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Let's go back to the beginning of the Bryce. One who weaves two threads, whether it's on the middle of weaving, whether it's on the edge, you're both chayiv. Stamak Rabbanon. Here we have the opposite. We have a Beraisa which quoted Rabbanon's opinion anonymously and then added Rabbi Eliezer as a second opinion. So we have two Beraisas which each one chose Rabbi Eliezer to be the main opinion and one chose Rabbanon to be the main opinion. Fine. So we were left with the same machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanon. We have just a few exceptions to Rabbi Eliezer. Either when it's thick or when it's thin, we're not sure, then two are enough. Or if it's a slightly different type of color or material, then also two are enough because it's significant. Fine. If you did two heedles, whether it was in Nirin, says the Gemara, might be Nirin. What does it mean that he did it in the heedles, or what does it mean that he did two heedles? So it is a bit hard to understand exactly the description of this, but somehow the way they would set up these threads in these loops, they would like wrap around twice the thread in the loop, and then the third time wrap around the thread around the rope which is holding this loop. And somehow that would be the way you set up the threads in order to weave them. Why am I saying it in such an unclear way? Because I was looking it up in the art scroll, and basically the art scroll said that also they're not so clear how exactly this description works about the two and then the one around it. They're not sure how exactly to work that out. So I guess it isn't that clear how exactly it works.
There was years ago, I had a book.
Yeah.
Not that I remember much of it, but there was a whole book on this Indian.
Yeah.
You remember?
It's very interesting.
I have it somewhere.
To know exactly, I mean, they were very smart, and the way they had their machines, they were quite. It was very, very well done and well set up. And I mean, the way we have it today in the machines is pretty much with the same logic, just by machine it's doing it. And then they have the pedals.
I watched a demonstration once in Tzfat. Somebody wanted to show, but I couldn't get it. I just couldn't get it. He
actually made an old-fashioned machine.
Yeah. It was in one of the storefronts in Tzfat in the old city. Young man, 3 years ago. And I just couldn't, my mind just couldn't.
I mean, these machines, I know my father tells me, he remembers when he wasn't in a child in Samarkand, that they used, that's what they would weave with these machines, with these pedals. But exactly how this detail of it works, the two and the one around it, that's a bit of a hard thing to understand how exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Bekeirus, what's Bekeirus? My Bekeirus Amara Mitsubisa. So it sounds like it's about when they would weave curtains. It's pretty much the same system, but it's another another weaving machine that they would use for curtains. That also, if you set up two loops, then it's considered already shtei batim. Okay. Then the next thing is a toifer-based firos. If you sew two stitches, so think about it 1 second. Hatanina, we learned it already. Ba'avis malach is about toifer-based firos. It's written over there with the shear. Okay, from the Kabbalah, the misne sefer v'akireya menas liter-based firos. Kotani nami a toifer v'akireya. It wants to tell you that tearing the size is also two stitches, and that's why it started off with sewing. So think about it. No, hanami tonino. It's also written in the last Mishnah. Ba'avis malachis. It says also about tearing. Elo mishum de kaboy lemisni sefer kirea b'chamosi v'al meisei mishumachi katani atefer shtitfiris. Really, it's an old introduction for next Mishnah. The next Mishnah wants to say that there's a case, according to some opinions, that if you tear and you're not planning to stitch it, you're also chayiv. So first starts off to say, usually it has to be that you're tearing it in order to stitch it 2 stitches. But in some cases, you're chayiv, according to some opinions, and if you're not planning to stitch it. Okay. Fine. You're tearing in order to sew 2 stitches. Why are you tearing? If you want to sew it, just leave it home. When do you tear in order to sew? Says the Gemara, the Ovid ki kista. If it's scrunched up, if the clothing got stretched and it's not even, and the way you could even it out is if you tear it and then you fold it and you make it very, very nice and smooth and then you sew it again. So sometimes if it became a bit scrunched up, it's bumpy, it's not smooth, the way to fix it is by tearing it and then sewing it. So there is such a concept of tearing in order to sew. Okay, so what we learned today is like this. There's an opinion which says that Rosh Tevis, 1 letter Rosh Tevis, Yechayiv on Shabbos. So we're bringing proofs from Torah that Rosh Tevis is a real thing. When the Torah wrote Av Hamoyin, it meant Rosh Tevis. When the Torah said Anoichi, it meant Rosh Tevis. When it says Yorat Haderech, it's Rosh Tevis. Carmel is Rosh Tevis. Nimretzes is Rosh Tevis. Nitztadok, all different things that the Torah clearly meant in Rosh Tevis. So we see that Rosh Tevis is a real thing according to Torah. Fine? Then what if you wrote 1 letter and then you remembered and then you forgot again and wrote another letter? Or according to Rashi, what if you wrote 1 letter in the morning and close to the evening you wrote another letter so you could have remembered in between? And then when Gamliel says it doesn't matter, it still joins together because he didn't know anything. Knowing a half, a malach is not called knowing anything. It's not hoidai love chatosai. But Chacham say no, it is called knowing something and therefore it cancels it out. You're not chayiv chatos. Then the next parak starts off with different details which the shear was mentioned, but we're adding different details. So about weaving, it mentioned 2 threads. Rabbi Eliezer argues. He says no. In the beginning it's 3, and in the middle it's 1. Now there's another brayso which said that even according to Rabbi Eliezer, in the beginning it's 2. So either that was talking about thicker threads, and therefore they are more noticeable, or thinner threads, and therefore they're more lasting. They attach better even with 2 threads. Then another brayso in the Gemara mentioned that even according to Rabbi Eliezer, if it's on the edge, and the edge is a different material or a different color, so it's important on its own, therefore 2 threads are also good enough to be chayiv because it's similar to weaving a belt, which even if it's very narrow, it's considered something choshev. We also mentioned that there's different braysos. That 1 brayso mentions Rabbi Eliezer without a name, 1 brayso mentions Chacham without a name. So there's different Tanoim, I guess, which sided with others of these opinions. Fine. Then we spoke about Shnei Bati Nirim, making the loops or putting the threads through the loops in the weaving loom. So if you put the threads through 2 loops, according to Rashi, then it's already considered this malacha of setting it up properly. But the way they did it is they wrapped it around the loop, the loop, and then they wrapped it around the rope, which was holding the loop twice around the loop and once around the rope. That was the way they would set up this weaving loom. And that's what started it off. Now, it's not just a weaving loom for regular clothing, it's also a weaving loom for curtains. And it's not just about weaving loom, it's also by certain types of weaving which you don't use a loom. But setting up the actual weaving is considered setting up the loom. That's what starts, that's what gives the framework in order to continue weaving. For example, a sieve or a basket. So then if you did 2 boxes within the weaving, you're also chayiv. Then the Mishnah mentions that sewing 2 stitches and tearing in the size and in order to sew 2 stitches, you're chayiv. Now, that was already mentioned in the Mishnah of Lametes Malachis. It's really only here as an introduction for next Mishnah that according to some opinions, you could sometimes tear with not in order to sew, and you're also chayiv. Now, when do you tear in order to sew? If it's crumpled up, if it's uneven, so then you cut it, you fold it, you make it even, and then you sew it again. That's a tearing in order to sew it.